can't wait for everybody to hear you. Like, it was such a shame that we couldn't get this recording out last time because I know that you were unwell. But
Yeah.
it's so great that you're here now. I can't wait for everybody to kind of hear you and hear what you've been up to, which sounds incredible. Like, just before we came on this podcast, you were like, I've done this and I've done this. And I was like, hold it. Let's wait for the podcast so that everybody can hear like all the amazing things you've been up to. So before we begin with everything, do you want to do an introduction to yourself? Who is Emma Fielding? What are you currently doing? And what have you got as exciting things to take you forward?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Emma Fielding. I'm based in Yorkshire, in my hometown of Barnsley. My main strategy is actually flipping houses, so buying very derelict, unloved houses, turning them into something amazing for local families, and obviously flipping them on for a profit. I've been doing this actually for the last 3 years officially, where I left the corporate world behind me in January 21. And yeah, everything is moving forward at a incredible rate. I work with investors now. I also mentor people as well, and just most recently won Young Property Investor of the Year as well. So,
Which is an amazing achievement. Like how many people were you up against for that Young Property Investor
quite
Award?
a few, to be honest. You don't really get to find out the official numbers, but at the award ceremony itself, there was like over 700 people there. So there's a lot of people in the mix of everything. But in terms of the category, I think it was quite a full category.
Full category, yeah.
Well, but it gets whittled down to kind of three of you actually on the awards evening, and obviously I was one of the three, and then I ended up winning as well.
That's incredible. And just out of curiosity, the other two people with you, were they male or female?
Both actually, yeah. One was female, one was male. So I guess there was more women in
I was going to say,
that category, which is
yeah,
obviously really nice to see as well.
amazing. 2-1. Fabulous. Amazing. Well, I definitely want to be asking you about that deal. I'm going to be asking you about that and for you to talk us through it and want to hear more about it. Absolutely. Oh no, sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. We were just saying about you introducing yourself. So in terms of your celebrations in that case, do you want to just talk us through something that you were celebrating in addition to the Young Property Award?
Yeah. So actually, just this week, actually, we've had an offer accepted on a flip renovation that I've recently done. So that's actually going to be sold in the next couple of months officially. And more recently, in the last week or so, my big project of the year, which is a 4-bed detached farmhouse. We actually had a pre-auction offer accepted on it. We're actually very close to completing in the next 4 weeks with it. So I cannot wait, because that project is going to be something really special.
Wow. And are you doing that sort of on your own, or have you got a joint venture partner for it? How's the
So,
structure?
yeah, so the structure is I'm actually working with a brand new investor. He's actually a high net worth individual, CEO of a company based down in London. I got speaking to him about a year ago now, and then I put this deal forward to him last April time. We actually had the offer accepted in May last year, and obviously now we're going through legals. It's been a hard slog, not on our part, by the way, actually on the vendor's part, because they've had quite a few things to sort out. But we are very close to completing. So he's putting in for the purchase price, and all the other expenses, the renovation costs, the stamp, the legals, everything else, that is down to my expense of my costs, basically.
Wow.
So yeah, we're actually buying that property at 275. The reserve price was 325. So obviously we've done quite a bit of negotiation on it, but obviously it's because of the condition of the property. And GDV is about 600.
Yeah. And just for our listeners, what does GDV stand for?
So gross development value. So basically that's your end kind of sale value of that project.
Perfect. I have so much I want to ask you. Like, my goodness, I'm here like thinking to myself, I've got this question and I've got this question. That sounds incredible. Like, particularly like a farmhouse as well. That's
Yeah.
very unique, and that must have like its own challenges, let's say, to it, I imagine.
It does. It does. To be fair, the farmhouse route is a new one for me, but I'd definitely like to every renovation go up a level. go up a step. I've done kind of extensions, I've done your cosmetic refurbs, I've done knocking down walls, all that kind of stuff. But this particular property is actually just over 100 years old. So you
Wow.
can imagine, like, the woodworm, beetle infestation. You can imagine the rising damp. It's got no central heating. Different roof tiles everywhere. It's going to be a lot of work, but actually putting a lot of love and care and attention into this house. If you thought, my other projects have been really good, this one is definitely going to be a different level, and it's in a really fantastic affluent area of Huddersfield as well. So yeah, it is really exciting.
Okay, perfect. I'm coming back to this. I'm going to park this for the moment so that I can do the correct order for the podcast, but I'm coming back to these questions. Perfect. So let me think about something that I'm celebrating. Well, I'm celebrating that we are now in February. So January for most of us was just so busy, like so busy. And I put a recent post up on Instagram, just kind of talking about my wins for January, my challenges, yeah, and my lessons. And you know what? It's really important because it's almost, dare I say, therapeutic, because I'm almost holding myself when I do it on Instagram accountable, because then I get to see and I get to be like, oh my goodness, look at all my wins in January. Like there was quite a lot. And of course, there were
that self-reflection process, isn't it?
Self-reflection, absolutely. And there were challenges as well. And I think it's really important to be open and honest and to say, do you know what? January was also a really, really tough month. Like, for example, our serviced accommodations in January. I mean, I'm supposed to be talking about celebrations here, but I'm just saying in general, like the serviced accommodation world was quite tough in January for most people. It's a
hard month.
It's a hard month, really hard month. And, we were quite fortunate that in one of our properties we had a long stay booking until the 30. It's going to be until the 31st. It was till the 31st of January, but at the same time, the other apartments literally just like broke even. So it's very tricky. It's very difficult, and I think that's really important to say. So I guess my celebration is going to be kind of one of reflection, thinking actually how well January went and how much more I've got to now push in February. Like, for example, I did my first ever my live webinar in January, which was terrifying. Have you ever done like a live webinar before?
No, I really haven't. I probably should, but like I've done like Instagram lives, and they like freak me out a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Like with all the questions coming in and stuff. But I probably should do like a webinar. So I'll definitely come to you for some tips.
Honestly, I can give you tips. I can so the worst one's always the hardest one, is what I would say. But I spoke for 90 minutes. Like, can you imagine just people looking at you for 90 minutes whilst they're eating their supper because it's 7:30 at night, and you're like, oh my God, this is absolutely terrifying. And what was really funny, and I think it's important to mention, is I had quite a few messages from people saying, you're so natural. Like, it's like you've been doing this for ages. I can't believe you weren't nervous. And I was like, no, all of those points you have just made are not correct. I was terrified doing that. And they came back to me and they said, I'm so glad that you said that to me, because it makes me feel so much better to know that you were terrified. So I'm just telling you, I was terrified to do that webinar.
But you know what? I definitely would be terrified as well doing that.
Yeah, but also it's such an exhilarating thing to do where you have a fear and you overcome it, because now that I've done my first one, I know that I can do so much better for the next one that I do, which I will be hosting at the end of February because so many people have asked me about it. So apologies for the long-winded answer on this one, guys, but my win for I think January and what I'm celebrating is the fact that I had a fear, overcame it, had some great wins in January, and looking forward to February and taking that forward. So
I think that's a really good win. I think
thank you.
Top win, to be honest.
I got there in the end. Apologies. So Emma, what I'd like to do is just to let you know, we have different types of listeners for the Girls and Property podcast. We have some listeners who have been in the property world for like quite a long period of time. They know everything that's going on, but they love tuning in to kind of hearing about what everybody's doing. But then we also have a different type of listener who is also trying to look to get into property, and so might not understand certain terminology that we use on a day-to-day basis and that type of thing. So just so that we all get on the same page, do you mind kind of just explaining about flipping, what it is, how it works, and maybe talk about like the type of flip projects that you work on, and we can kind of take it from there?
Yeah, so a standard kind of flip really is that you buy something that is, very derelict, it's very run down, it's very old, it's very dated. You're kind of essentially looking at the worst houses on a particular street, basically. With that, you're then wanting to add value. How you add value is actually through a renovation. And that renovation can consist of many things. If it's just a simple cosmetic refurb, ripping out a kitchen, putting in a new kitchen, bathroom, etc. Or it could be, a bit more kind of structural, knocking down some walls, changing the internal floor plan. Or from that, it could be, doing extensions, adding to the square footage. And then obviously when you've kind of done your renovation, it's actually about putting that house back on the market, ideally as quick as possible, really, because what you want to be doing with the flip, you want to be in and out of the deal as quickly as possible, basically, because it's all about turning over your cash or your investors' cash as quickly as possible, so then they can get a return on their money, or you can then go again and buy another flip. But actually, what is really great about flips is that, essentially you can do a flip, you can buy a property, renovate it, and sell it within 6 months, and then from there you can then buy another one, and you can obviously grow your pot of cash. Now, when I started in property, I only actually had £20,000, which obviously isn't a lot of money at all. But the more times you do flips, the bigger pot your pot becomes, basically. And then from there, where I'm at now, I'm just over 10 flips. I think I'm at 11 now. And I'm going to push this goal to 15. When I get to 15 flips, I'm then going to go into another avenue of property. That might be HMOs, it might be commercial to resi, or it might be land and new builds. So really, for me, when I was starting out in property, it was all about growing my initial pot to basically ended up giving me more opportunities and more kind of, chances to really have a good go at property. So that is why I chose flipping over your standard buy to lets or HMOs and anything like that.
Do you know what? I love that. And a couple of points I love about what you just made. The first point I love is that you chose a strategy that worked for you. So
Yeah,
you're saying you've done now 11 flips. So you're
yeah.
like, look, I've concentrated specifically on flipping. So just to double check. So you talked about the fact you might move on to kind of HMOs and SA and commercial to resi. So at the moment, is it kind of your standard residential 3-4 bed houses buy to lets?
Yes, so I deal with anything from kind of a one bed terrace, turning it into a two-bed terrace, or a three-bed semi, changing that around, or kind of a detached bungalow that's a two-bed, turn it to a four-bed. So there's a whole mix of kind of flips that I do, from your very simple cosmetic refurbs to your more intensive, adding 55 square meter extensions onto a bungalow. So there's a whole mix of kind of development there, but essentially what you're kind of doing is obviously increasing the value so much in a property to end up selling it on for a profit.
Love it. Fabulous. So, as I said, what I love about what you've just said is the fact that, you focused on that strategy and
Yeah,
therefore you went and you developed that and you learned. You didn't kind of go, oh, I'm going to do a flip and then I'm going to do a commercial to resi and then I'm going to go and do, I don't know, like a rent to rent and then I'm going to go and do this. You kind of picked your focus and you
yeah,
stayed with that focus and you didn't get like shiny penny syndrome in all sorts of directions. You
yeah,
learned, you grew, you learned, you grew. And I really love that. I love the fact that you focused and narrowed almost like a tunnel vision and you kind of
yeah.
just went for that. And
Very much.
yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that I've got no doubt that along the way, I mean, in terms of like how you got into it, okay, so you said you had £20,000 when you
Yeah.
first started. So talk to us about the beginning. Like if we go back to the beginning, how is it that you went from £20,000 to now having 11 flips? What did you do with your 20,000?
So for me, kind of even before I had the £20,000, I kind of got started in a kind of a family home that my dad inherited, basically up in the northeast. So that house basically enabled me to actually try a renovation myself. Do you know what I mean? Like in terms of like ripping off, wallpaper, ripping off tiles, managing trades, and I did that renovation in 6 weeks while I was working full time, and I had £10,000 from my dad, and I had a 30 grand's worth of equity. So for me, that was the light bulb moment. And I thought, actually, at that point, that was in 2018, I thought, actually, at some point, I'm going to get into property in my lifetime, right? When that was going to happen, I didn't particularly know. However, I then got a corporate job at Morrison's, training to be a financial accountant, which was obviously really good, really exciting. And obviously with that, with the corporate job, you can save up money, and I was already saving. So that's what initially gave me the £20,000. From there, I then actually ended up buying my first home that was actually my home that I lived in. So it was my first residential property. And with that, I bought it on a mortgage. £10,000 was the deposit, and then 10 grand was for the refurb. So I bought that at 96.5 grand, did a refurb for 10 grand, and I sold it for 143 grand in 9 months, just after the first lockdown of COVID. So house prices went quite high. So that was great. And that was just literally a 3-bed terrace house in Barnsley, in the heart of Barnsley. Bought off market, but anyway, that's a different story. But from there, that actually enabled me again to grow my capital pot to about, I think it was about 60,000 at that particular point. So I then bought a bigger house on a better street in a better area of Barnsley, and I put all that money into this house. And again, did the same thing. Did a refurb. This time, I knocked down a couple of walls. I made it kind of a bit more family friendly because that was a 3-bed semi house. And I then ended up selling that within 6 months. Again, it was still my house, so it was still on a mortgage. And I ended up doing that. And yeah, I sold that within 6 months. And again, I made similar amount of profit, to be honest. So I think the first house made about £36,000. My second house I made about £33,000. So at that point there, I was at a kind of a crossroads, so to speak. So like I've done 3 renovations, I've sold 2 of them, I've loved it, I've enjoyed it. Bearing in mind I've worked full time, I've managed all the trades as well, and I thought actually, I need to get into this more. So I was actually, at cross points in my career as well, thinking I don't want to, be in the corporate world anymore. I don't enjoy it. 3 hours traveling a day, it wasn't my thing. So I actually left the corporate world. Luckily, I had a 6-figure equity, out of the 2 houses that I'd kind of flipped. So that 6-figure sum, I think it was about 107,000 at the time that I came out with. That basically was my cash pot to then take and basically use with other flips. So my third house, I bought that cash. That was in a really bad area of Barnsley. It was a 1-bed cottage for like 52 grand. I ended up selling it for about 96 grand, something like that. But again, I still made more money than my corporate job wage. And again, in 6 months. So it seemed a no-brainer. And then it was house number 4. I then started working with investors. And then ever since, I've worked with investors. So in terms of how I structure it with them is that they'll put in for the purchase price, and then I'll fund the refurb, the stamp, the legals, and all the other costs. So that's basically how I've scaled to where I am now.
So that's fantastic. I really love that. And I love listening to your journey actually as to where you started. So some things I'd really like to just point out and pick up what you just said. A couple of things. Number one is you actually had a full-time corporate job whilst you were getting into property, which I think is a really important thing to note. I speak to people who say to me, oh, it's very difficult for me about getting into the property world because I have a full-time job. So I don't have a lot of time. You've literally just proven the fact that you can do it if you have a full-time job. You literally did this.
I was traveling 3 hours so I'm based in Barnsley. I was traveling to Bradford every day as well. So it's about 3-hour drive.
Wow. So in addition to your So in addition to your full-time job, you also were driving to and from Barnsley as well. Right. Well, there you go. So if you can do it, anyone can do it. Like, that's fantastic.
Exactly. There is no excuses.
The other thing I love that you mentioned was the fact that so you started with this pot of cash. However, the first person who ever actually invested in you and technically was an investor and was your investor was actually your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. Absolutely, it is. And I think what's so important to mention is the fact that I speak to a lot of people and they say, oh, well, I can't get an investor because I don't have any experience, and I can't get an investor because nobody will invest in me. And I'm like, well, have you spoken to your friends and family? Have you spoken to people who actually know you, like you, and trust you? Because it'd be so much easier than trying to go and speak to a stranger. And they're like, oh, no, I don't feel comfortable going to talk to my family and friends about money. And I'm like, but you're doing them. You got to see it as you're actually doing them a favor. You're bringing them an opportunity. You're bringing them a deal to make money. That's a good thing. And sometimes, again, we come back to this idea of mindset, of actually starting and getting into it and growing. So I just wanted to point out those 2 points, which I thought was so fantastic. The fact that you started actually with creative ways of funding the projects, and you
Yeah,
didn't go straight in at the deep end. You started small, which is so important. I sometimes see
I
people
think,
running.
you've got to stress when it's your first kind of three, maybe four, developments, you've got to play safe, stick to an area, stick to a property that you know well, do as little as possible to make maximum money. And that's what I was doing on my first kind of 4 or 5, really.
Yeah, so fascinating. And do you know the other thing just to mention also is because this is quite a recent conversation I had with somebody, and I just want to get your opinion about this. So we're down in the south, so I live down in the south, as it were, and of course you're up in the north. And what's really funny is a lot of people will say things such as, "Oh, well, flips tend to work better in the south. The buy, refurbish, rent, refinance strategy is more Midlands and North, and of course your rental yields are higher in the north, as it were." You've just flipped that on its head to say, "Well, I'm flipping in the north."
Yeah,
And
in,
so,
in, in, in probably what people will call, quite a deprived area, but actually,
yeah,
Barnsley's not a deprived area. Yes, it's an ex-mining town, but actually, when you look at the details of Barnsley, house prices are lower than the national average, but the only one way they're going to go is up. And in the last couple of years, they've gone up.
no,
So,
it's fascinating, and something that you just said I'd really like to pick up on, which is you just said, look, the best thing to do when you're starting out is to invest in your area, know your area. So
yeah,
somebody messaged me the other day on Instagram, and they said, "Hi, Athena, I've been speaking to somebody, and they told me that the South is effectively dead, and you can't invest in the South," which, first of all, is a load of bollocks, but we'll come back to that. And then they said to me, "So I'm thinking about going up north to invest now because they've told me to go up north to invest." And I straight away was like, "Stop what you're doing. Hold up. Like, listen to me." And so it's really important, which is what you've just said. And I want to reiterate it, please, is to invest in what you know, invest in your area. It's the best
absolutely.
investment you can make. And I've always said, if you know your area and you buy at the right price, you can
Agreed.
make a deal. Any deal, you can make it
Yeah.
work.
The saying that I always go with when I'm looking at any deal is that you make your money when you buy, not when you sell. As long as you get that purchase price right, and obviously it's got to be under market value, or you're going to be adding significant value to the actual property to force that value to go up. You make your money when you buy, not when you sell.
Love that. And actually, you've just led me on to another question, actually, if that's okay, which is when you're flipping properties, for example, and you're thinking about the end valuation, um, what I'd really like you to touch on is things such as, in your opinion, what adds the most value to properties. So, in your opinion, what do you think is the best way to make the most money from a flip?
Yeah, so for me, my kind of bread and butter as a flipping business is your 3-bed semis because, you've got that demand, families want them, first time buyers attract them, second time owners want to be, in them as well. They're going up the property ladder. So for me, it's about making those 3-bed semis, as gorgeous and as friendly as possible, as in user friendly, as in, knocking down a couple of walls to make an open plan kitchen diner or putting patio doors on. You're creating a home that people want to be in for the next 5 to 10 years. So, if you have obviously, or if you see, a very derelict 3-bed semi, putting new windows in, putting a brand new central heating system in, brand new kitchen, brand new bathroom. I mean, you're going luxury, you're going high spec. All my renovations are high spec. For me, I love to use color. I used to stage the properties as well. So, it's not like you're creating a home that's got white walls, grey carpets, because that's only going to, achieve a certain amount of, selling price basically. But my renovations, they go above that kind of ceiling price on the street because of the spec, because of the standard, because of actually what we've done to the property. And also as well, I think it's really important to say whatever work you are getting done in terms of having new boiler, brand new electrics or knocking down internal walls, having that work signed off by the local council or having the relevant certificates is equally as important, if not more important, because when you come to sell that property on, obviously all that documentation backs up the valuation to a surveyor, and to the estate agents, and obviously getting it through legals as well. So it's quite a long process, really, when you're kind of looking at a flip and actually how much do you add value. Well, in essentially it's the work itself, whatever that work may be, but again, that's very dependent on the property itself. But for me, 3-bed semis are the bread and butter of the business, and turning them into something incredibly luxury in terms of it just attracts the right buyer.
Yeah, love that. And I love the fact you mentioned paperwork as well, because I think a lot of people almost skip that bit. And you're
Yeah,
right, that bit's so
which
important.
happens. Yeah. And to be honest, I've purchased quite a few properties that have got rear extensions, but they've not got the building regs. So we've gone in for respective building regs. Now that is a great element there to actually be able to renegotiate on a purchase price, because they haven't got the right documentation. And I've done that many times, and it works really well. So again, going back to that previous comment that I made, you make your money when you buy, not when you sell. So, every property has issues with it to whatever extent. And it's about you finding those issues out and actually playing them to your advantage. Now, if you're getting stuff signed off by the council, or you're doing work to rectify, somebody work that they've done previously, that all goes in your advantage when you're kind of negotiating on a potential purchase.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I hope you don't mind me adding just a couple that I sort of
Mhm.
found out about. So I was speaking to some valuers recently about a
Yeah.
couple of projects that I'm looking at. And, they was talking about things such as, if there's already a bath in the property, don't take that bath out and put like
Mhm.
a shower in, keep the bath, because then you're going to attract more families. And they were
Yes.
saying about the fact that also in regards to building en suites into the bedrooms, that adds the
Mhm.
value. And of course, the
Yes.
extensions, building up into loft and building out. Whereas
Yeah.
I've seen people, for example, who have done flip projects and spent so much money, and I've literally seen this happen on kitchens or lounges, and it's more cosmetic than I would say like functional. And as a
Yeah.
result of that, they might have spent, let's just use an example here, and it's a random example, it's not a true example, but £10,000 on a kitchen, but then it only added like what, 3 grand, four
Yeah.
grand to the
Yeah.
valuation. And they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, but I spent 10 on it. And it's like, yeah, but you don't understand. What you spend on the property does not equal what it goes up in value. And that's what a
Agree.
lot of people don't, they don't understand the correlation
Yeah.
of you've got to spend the money where the valuer is going to value it, because it's the valuer at the end of the day who is going
Mhm.
to give you that valuation, as it were, whether
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
buy, refurbish, rent, refinance, or a flip. It's the same
Mhm.
thing. So
Yeah,
that's
I think
important
as
to
well,
know.
I think, when you're kind of planning out your refurbs, it's really, really important to actually look at the sold comparables, that's on that street in a quarter of a mile, maximum half a mile, really, ideally. What has sold, what is like for like. I mean, you're comparing apples with apples, not apples and potatoes, for example. And for me, I don't really tend to put on tweets in, a 3-bed semi, because, the sold comparables haven't got that. So it would be a bit odd if I did that. However, where I can maximize more value is actually the overall look of the property, taking out, the single wood windows, adding new UPVC windows, 10-year warranty on a boiler, all that kind of stuff really, really adds up. So I think you've got to kind of look at the competition as well. But actually, sometimes you don't need to go to the full extent of, adding a loft conversion or adding an extension, because ultimately what you want to do, you want to be getting out of that deal quite quickly, and obviously a renovation can take time. If you're doing more heavy, manual stuff, as in, loft conversions or extensions, it's going to take more time. So sometimes, just doing a simple refurb is enough. But the really, really important thing there is that you've got to buy it at the right price to be able to have that margin.
Yeah, you make an excellent point there, which is it depends on kind of what it is you're buying. And you're
Yeah,
right in saying about the competition. And well, what is the competition doing? And how do you
exactly.
be that little bit extra?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I was thinking more about my HMO conversions with the loft extensions and things, as opposed to the 3-bed semis. But Absolutely. And it's all about that. And can you think about like any, like people ask me all the time about utilizing like data analysis and tools online, and the best ones to use. Like I'm thinking about Net Pricer to obviously, look at what houses are selling for and sold for in the area. Can you think of any others that might help?
So for me, like I'm probably a bit of an oddball here. I actually don't use any of that. So, for me personally, I focus on kind of 2 or 3 postcodes in my particular area, right? And I know what each and every house has sold for within the last 5 years. And that's me just having a brain that A doesn't switch off, but also, speaking with agents, seeing what house, comes on the market at, etc., and checking that data. I don't necessarily go to the full extent. That's only because I know what type of houses they actually are. So, I've kind of already got that research. However, if you're investing in a very new area, then all them data platforms are very much relevant. But for me, just because obviously I've grown up in the area, I know it like the back of my hand. I don't necessarily do that, but maybe I should. I don't
No,
know.
I think that's a fantastic answer. And again, we come back to the same point, which is invest in your area and
Yeah,
invest in what you know, because you cannot go wrong. Please,
yeah.
if you're in the south, please don't be listening to people telling you to invest in the north. Like just just invest in your area.
In your area, you really, really can.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to what you were celebrating originally, you being sort of awarded the young property investor of is it the year? Young property
Yes,
investor of the
yeah,
year?
yeah, 2023. So
That's
yeah,
that's
going
that's
to
massive. That's like
it's crazy. Yeah,
incredible. I salute
mental.
you, like amazing.
Thank
So
you.
do you want to talk us through kind of why you won that and the deal that won it for you?
Yeah, yeah. So actually, at the time, it was probably my biggest deal to date, and that was actually a 2-bed detached bungalow on what local people would call the street as Millionaires Row. So this particular street, a lot of houses, they've been very, very old, they're outdated. A lot of people have come in, knocked them down, and they've built mansions on them. So hence why the street has got that kind of name and reputation. So actually, with that is a really good thing because actually, the ceiling price of the street increases a heck of a lot compared to the other local streets. But anyway, so the 2-bed detached bungalow was very dated, probably not been touched in about 60 years. And we ended up actually, well, it went on the market for 280. We ended up securing the property for 264 and a half. We were actually cash buyers, no chain as well at that particular time. And I actually worked with an existing investor that actually put into house flip number 4, and I think this time it was house flip number 7. So I'd obviously got a really, really good relationship with them and things. So they put in 250,000 for the purchase price. I then made up the extra, and then the stamp duty was about £11,000, and then obviously legals, estate agent costs. The refurb itself, that was £120,000 renovation, so the biggest renovation I've done to date. I actually self-managed that renovation, and we actually ended up turning the property from a 2-bed, 1 bathroom, 85 square meters bungalow to a 4-bed, 3 bathroom, 140 square meter bungalow, and it was basically a full wraparound extension of the actual bungalow, and we turned it into something what I would call, a very high-end spec. We're talking bifolds, we're talking roof lanterns, a handleless kitchen, quartz worktops, LTV flooring. It was wow, to be quite honest. So basically, that renovation took 8 months. I worked with a local team of young builders. They were fantastic. And then after they got the shell up of the renovation of the extension, I then worked with my existing team of trades, and I managed them right until the end of when we finished the renovation, and we ended up selling that bungalow for 495. And I think the thing that I'm probably most proud about is actually I actually said to my investors, now I only take my investors' money for 12 months, and we actually ended up buying, refurbing, and selling that property within 51 weeks. So, a big project like that is possible in that time frame.
Do you know that is incredible? No wonder you won the award. Like that is fantastic. And just thinking about that, I'm trying to think about being in your shoes. And the trick I think that you need in that situation is you need the best power team. You,
Oh,
the
absolutely.
power team is the secret weapon in that.
Yeah. I think, I got quite lucky with my builders. They actually came through a recommendation of my plumber because they had already worked together on quite a few projects. But actually, the builder itself, it was his biggest project to date. He was, a similar age to me, I think a couple of years older. He really wanted to get into kind of the bigger stuff. So I said, okay, well, this is your chance. At the end of the day, we've got the planning. Planning was already granted before we purchased the property, which is obviously, a big advantage. And I said, look, I need this extension being built. I've got some strict timelines. The plan would be that you build a shell, we get it to that certain point, and then I take it over and put my stamp on it, which is obviously the interiors, and me managing that team of my individual trades, which is probably no different to a 3-bed semi, to be honest. It's just on a bit of a bigger scale. But luckily, when you work with really good trades that get your vision, that understand where you're going, and also at that time when I was doing that particular project, I actually was managing 2 other flips as well. So I was managing 3 flips. So I was literally moving the trades from house to house to house and staggering them, which obviously worked really well for them because obviously they're getting a lot more work. Obviously, they're getting paid on time as well. So, I definitely got the best out of my team. And I think actually what made the kind of the renovation successful is that I would always treat the lads kind of on a Friday. It would always be fish and chips, or it would always be cakes and cookies, or beers on a Friday. So I kept the motivation and the morale really high throughout that renovation, because I knew that it's a big renovation tackling that, and we had our challenges. Don't get me wrong, in the renovation you always do, but again, to keep that morale high, it got me the best outcome.
Definitely invest in fish and chips. Absolutely.
Fish and chips on a Friday.
Yeah, you know what my one is? I always do, as long as I check they're not vegetarian. I always do bacon butties for my guys.
Good, yeah,
I'm like, who fancies a bacon
yeah,
butty and like a coffee or a cup of tea? And they're like, oh yeah, definitely. I'm like,
yeah,
that's my secret weapon.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
definitely,
keep your trades sweet, keep them on side, pay, within reason, pay them on time and things like that.
of course.
But they are sort of the a power team is crucial to a project such as this. And actually, you answered one of my questions, which was going to be in regards to planning for that. The planning
Yeah.
was already granted then on that property.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So obviously, statutory planning takes about 8 weeks. The offer was actually kind of subject to contract, but I was really confident that we were going to get the planning. We weren't going in for something crazy. Bearing in mind, this street, they've built mega mansions on it. So, something like a wraparound extension, majority of it was actually in PD. There was only very, very small part of the actual extension that needed full planning, because it didn't fall under PD. But ultimately, it got passed, I think, within, initially 6 weeks. We just had to change the position of the actual roof at the front. But overall, it got passed within 8 weeks, which was really great, to be honest, because obviously your worst nightmare is waiting on planning, and luckily everything fell in the right time frame, really.
Fantastic. It sounds like an amazing project. And I'm sure people on will be able to see the project also on social
Yeah,
media.
it's in.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous, absolutely. And so for our listeners who are out there at the moment, can you give them any advice in regards to, let's say that they wanted to get into flipping? Like they're like, right, this is my strategy. I want to get into flipping. How, are there any kind of things that you wish you would have known when you were starting out, or any mistakes that you made on the first one, or things that you then lessons that you took to the next one? What advice would you give for people starting out?
Yeah, I think my main advice, like even before I got into kind of property, I was doing a lot of research, really, and that research contained of a lot of YouTube videos of different developers, different investors. I went to kind of 1 day course as well, which actually wasn't that great at the time. But I surrounded myself probably with the right people, or I was in the right environment, and things. But actually, what I think really, really helped me is that I had a clear vision. vision. Now, I think, when you get into property, you necessarily don't know what avenue to go down. But I nailed that actually flipping was the one for me, because I wanted to grow my cash pot significantly over the next couple of years. So I had that tunnel vision, of flipping 10 houses. And obviously, that's obviously where I'm at now. And it pays off really, really well, I think, just to have that clear, focus and that clear vision. So it's about understanding, what do you want to get out of property? What are your goals? And how do you want to go about achieving that? And actually, with that, what are the other mini, goals you've got to, achieve, as in raise investors, or, where to find your houses, or, what contacts in terms of agents, have you got to get? So, for me, it's about setting that goal really early, that I think will push you forward in more ways than one. And I think, when you've got an opportunity, or, when you think you're ready, go out and do it. Don't wait about, don't faff about, just literally go out and put everything in motion. And that's what I did. And 3 and a bit years later, to be honest, I haven't looked back.
Yeah, I love that. And what a great lesson to teach everyone, which is, the hardest part is always starting, and you will make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes, but just learn from those mistakes and kind of push forward.
Yeah,
And the other thing that I loved was the fact that you said, like, for example, on when I've done solo episodes on this podcast before, and I talk a lot about letting the strategy choose you. And I
yeah,
talk about a 70-20-10 split. And your strategy clearly is that you want lump sums. And what I love is you're out there promoting the fact, look, you don't have to leave your full-time corporate job. If you've got a great full-time corporate job, it's not
yeah,
about trying to leave that job. It's about, well, how can I buffer my income? I talk
yeah,
all the time about diversifying your income, stay in your job, get what you need from that, and carry on with that, but then go and get yourself some lump sums, which is exactly what you did with the flip. So that's your main strategy. And
yeah, yeah,
it's got to be right for everyone. And I love what you said about creating a clear action plan. Whereas
yeah.
otherwise you end up just flapping around all over the place, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, like, for me personally, like, I get a lot of messages, from people like, how do I get started? Well, your number one is like, actually, what do you want to get out of property? Like, you've got to ask those questions to yourself, to be able to know which strategy to go down, because obviously there are so many strategies out there, and it's about tailoring what you want out of property to the strategy that you want to do. And I knew I just wanted to grow my cash pot, and I knew Barnsley was a great area to do that. I was already looking at sold comparables. I was already thinking, oh, I can't believe that house has gone for that. Oh, why has it gone for that? Oh, because it's got an ensuite, or because it's got an extension on the kitchen, or because it's a great spec, or it's in a better street than the one behind it, for example. So I was already doing a lot of that kind of research and information, but that research and information really said to me, okay, flipping is the one for me. Because at the end of the day, bearing in mind, before I even got into property, I didn't know anything about houses, really, to be honest. I didn't even know how to change a light bulb. Obviously I know now, but that's how basic my knowledge was. And I also thought, actually, flipping is really good because I can understand a process of a renovation. Now, I know that process. I managed the refurbs from literally start to finish. So, for me, knowing that refurb process, it doesn't go much different if you add in the mix of HMOs, or if you add in buy to lets, or if you add in new build developments. So for me, understanding that kind of renovation process and streamlining that as much as possible, again, was another reason why I wanted to get into flipping before I did the more complicated stuff, with HMOs, commercial, or, land and new builds.
Love it. You're walking before you're running, which is
Exactly.
perfect. I love that.
And I think also, because the trades that I work with, they know that I've obviously, managed refurbs, I've got hands on, I've knocked down walls, I can now, replumb a house if I really have to, so I've done parts of the renovation and obviously manage all that renovation. So actually you get much more respect with the trade team or with the main contractor than if you hadn't have done that first.
Yeah, fantastic tips. Like that is such good advice for flipping. I think that's brilliant, and I love the journey, and I love what you've kind of gone on. Another thing that I think is really important to mention on this podcast, because it's all about kind of keeping it real and making sure that, you know, everybody knows about kind of what life can entail as well. Of course, I tried to get you on this podcast as well, like a couple of I think it was last week or the week before, as
Yeah,
it
yeah,
were. And of course, you were unwell, which I
yeah,
know a lot of people were for January, as it were.
yeah.
And what I really wanted to talk to you about also was, obviously you're doing fantastic, like you're so successful. Like, as I said, I salute you. Like, it's amazing. But I also want to be really kind of have the conversation with you about that work-life balance aspect
Mm.
and being unwell and what that was like for you, kind of taking you out of action, and any kind of thoughts you had about that regarding sort of
Yeah,
health.
yeah. So I think for me, my first kind of probably six flips, I was very, very tunnel vision. So I wouldn't really see my friends. I wouldn't really go to the gym. I was like all on property. And I mean, I was laser focused. Now, at times you've got to be like that, to get them few steps ahead. However, when you have kind of that momentum, and when I was actually ill, like a couple of weeks ago, I thought, actually, I need to take some time off. Like, you've really got to prioritize your health in property, because if you don't have that, like, what else do you have? Yeah, you might have a couple of $100,000 in the bank or whatever, but regardless of that, your health is the most important. And actually understanding that, actually, I need to take a couple of days off because I'm not great, and I'm not going to be great around either, on the mix of a renovation. So, actually just taking that time off, just prioritizing yourself, go for a nice walk or go for a coffee. I really enjoy the simple things in life, going to my favorite coffee shop, taking my dog for a walk, and, spending time with my partner and things. And, in those early days, I didn't really do any of that. And I kind of regret not doing those things. But then I always think, like, what if I did those things? Would I be where I am now? Probably, yeah, but it might have took me a little bit longer. But I think now, I look back and I think, yeah, I need to prioritize me a little bit more. I need to kind of put me first, and things. So
Yeah, and
that's
you know,
really what I'm prioritizing this year.
yeah,
So
and I think that's a fantastic goal to have, you know, which is to prioritize yourself. And don't get us wrong, like, you know, I'm also the same as you. I'm very much tunnel visioned. And actually, another thing I thought I'm celebrating is, which is a massive deal for me. Like I said, it's the little wins, and this is not, as people
yeah.
know, this is not like a common thing that I do. Yesterday was Monday morning, so we're recording this on
Mhm.
Tuesday, the week before, and I actually went for breakfast on a Monday morning with my partner, and
That's
took,
really nice.
like, from 9 a.m. until 11. I just was with him, just no work, just with
Yeah,
him. That's
yeah,
massive for me. That is massive, because Monday morning is my most crazy time. The podcast gets launched, all my messages come through. Like, don't get me wrong, I had slight anxiety as I was eating my bacon and sausages, but but at the same time, like, it, just one day at a time, isn't it? It's
yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah, and I think for me, like, every morning I wake up, I write down in my notes in my phone, okay, what do I need to do today? What do I need to achieve? Who do I need to email? Who do I need to, get hold of, and this, that, and the other. And I think that really helps, because actually that gives a lot of satisfaction to me when I've actually done it. When I look back on the day, oh, I've done this, I've done that, yeah, I've ticked that off, blah blah blah. I'm very much like, I like, the ticks. I like to take it off my phone as I've done it. So, I think it's about understanding actually what makes you happy. And for me, after I've done something, ticking that off, or, taking that off my phone, as something that I don't have to do, is really, really good. And I think, yeah, that can be quite healthy, to be
yeah,
honest.
I love a tick list. I am here for a tick list.
Yeah.
So just to finish off this podcast, Emma, what I'd love to do is also, which is one of our, well, majority of our viewers' favorite bit, which is the juicy bit. It's sort of a property disaster, property mishap you might have experienced
Yeah.
within your world of flipping and property life. So do you have one for us?
Yeah, so you know what? When you actually were speaking about this, I was trying quite hard to think about it. Quite a good one. But anyway, so I thought about one. So I had a offer accepted on a property, and actually at first, I think this must have been renovation number kind of 7 or 8, something like that. And it was only a 2-bed terrace, but it was quite run down. No central heating, etc. And actually, I think it went up for 85 grand, and I had the offer accepted at 82 something, or whatever. So I actually thought, okay, I'm just gonna, put my money in. I don't need an investor for this one, so I'm just going to all do it myself. And then I had another project that was actually about to complete. So all that money that I was initially waiting and, you know, holding back for this other project, I then had to put in a new project. So what I had to then find, I had to find an investor for the original house, the 82 grand house. But actually, the issue with that house is that we didn't know when probate was actually going to be granted. Now, probate, obviously, you don't know when that's going to be granted. But I said to this investor, look, you know, it's been going on for about 6 months now. I'm hoping it's not going to be long, this, that, and the other, you know, and hopefully it'll be fine. So the investor was like, okay, that's fine. You know, let's just sit tight. Anyway, we were sitting tight. And I think, you know, it was another 6 months till this house actually completed. And by that time, the investor actually said, look, Emma, you know, I can put my money elsewhere with other, you know, in investments. You know, I can get a greater, a bigger lump of interest and stuff. So I was like, okay, no problem. But really, you know, it was a really difficult situation because not only was I in the midst of 2 other renovations at that particular point, I had this house, this 82 grand house that I'd been waiting on for about 12 months actually in the end, you know, that initially I was going to fund. Then I put the money elsewhere. So I had to get that investor on board. Bearing in mind, this investor was, you know, quite a big deal. You know, he was a high net worth individual, ex-CEO of a massive supermarket chain. So I was like, I really don't want to let him down. And actually, he ended up actually walking away from the deal, which I don't actually blame him, to be honest. I really, really don't. And actually, we spoke about it since, and I'll probably do some work with him at some point. But it was just the wrong deal for that wrong investor at the wrong time. And it was really, really frustrating. And I remember when I got the email from him, and I was absolutely gutted. I mean, I was so gutted. But actually, how I recovered from that is that luckily, you know, I actually said to an existing investor, because he was a new investor at the time, look, I've got this project, I need 82.5 grand, can you put it in? Yeah, they were like, you know, they didn't hesitate. So luckily it all worked out fine, and then I ended up doing a great refurb. It sold well to first time buyers, and it through legals, and again I sold that within 5.5 months of actually purchasing it, from renovation to selling. So really the back end of it, the my bit, worked really, really well. But the before bit, when, you know, we were still in legals and we didn't know when probate was going to obviously be granted. Obviously, you need probate to be granted before you can actually, you know, complete on a purchase. That was a really difficult time, but it is what it is.
Yeah, that sounds stressful. That definitely sounds stressful, especially when you got the other renos going on as well. Absolutely. But
Yeah,
what's great in that is that, you know, okay, you're allowed to be, you know, we're human beings. We're allowed to be sad in the moment and to think, oh, do you know what? I can't believe I just lost that, and to have that disappointment. But what you didn't do was you didn't let that eat you alive and kind of therefore not take it forward. You went, okay, I'm going to have this moment to be sad. I'm going to have this moment to understand that this is disappointing.
It was about 2 hours.
That's all right. Do you know what? That's not bad. I'd have given you a day. I'd have said you're allowed a day. But then you've got to pull yourself back up again and say, okay,
Oh,
well,
yeah,
what's next? Well,
absolutely. But I think the most important bit here is actually existing relationships paid off well, because, you know, and actually the new investor wanted a really high amount of interest, and he wanted PG as well, and I wasn't really prepared to give it, but I thought actually just to get him on board, I will go for it. But actually my existing investor was actually less interest and everything, and obviously it's straight through legal, so it was really good. Really.
fantastic. And you know what? You just actually made a fantastic point, which I think is a great way to end this podcast, which is the relationships. Build your relationships. You might not need those relationships today, but you might need those relationships in a couple of months, a couple of weeks. You just never ever know. So keep them, build them, and keep going forward. So actually, it was a property disaster that turned out all right.
Yeah, it's actually not bad, to be honest, really. But just in that moment, it was pretty stressful.
Yeah, and exactly, and I completely hear that. So in terms of what you're doing at the moment, I know you mentioned that people message you in regards to wanting to learn more about flipping and mentoring and that
Yeah,
type of thing. So if you want, just tell people where they can find you and how they can kind of work with you going forward as well.
yeah, absolutely. So mainly Instagram. So it's just Emma Property Developments on Instagram, and it's same on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. Or you can find me direct, just Emma Fielding.
Yeah, perfect, lovely. And I'm Athena Dobson _official. We are Girls in Property on Instagram, Girls in Property Pod at gmail.com. And of course, if you haven't got tickets already to the Girls in Property retreat, there are now only 11 tickets left. We're down to 11 tickets. So, which is really, really exciting. And that's going to be on Friday, 19th of April. So if you do want to come, you haven't grabbed yours yet, then make sure you do, because we're soon going to go into single digits on that one.
Right.
But yeah, thank you, Emma, so much for joining me today. I've loved
Thank
it, and
you.
learning all about flips and learning about how you got into it, and just something different, which I think is so important as well. So thank you so much for your time. And I hope the listeners really enjoyed it, and we'll speak to you guys soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.